This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here at 401 Bay, high up in the air, with none other than winemaker Kevin Judd. How are you today, sir?
Good, thank you.
Now, you are a man with quite a tale behind you, and I was lucky enough to have a chance to taste some of the wines that you've been producing over the last 5 years, and was incredibly impressed and felt drawn towards having a little interview with you. So those people who are less than familiar with your background and the like, you just told me a few moments ago that you were actually from England and then found yourself making wine in South Australia. How did that come about?
Well, I was born in England, but my parents immigrated to Australia when I was 9. So obviously when you're 9 you go with the flow. So off we went to South Australia, and I was brought up in Adelaide. And in Adelaide, when you leave high school, one of the options is to study winemaking, because there's an excellent wine college there called Rosewood Agricultural College.
Of course.
So, I must admit I wasn't born under a grapevine. Winemaking, I was interested in science subjects and that sort of thing, and I guess winemaking just offered the sort of science background, but also a rural environment, and it intrigued me. But I wouldn't have called myself a wine drinker at the time. I was 21. After about 2 years working for the company I worked for was called Zealand. They're a family company up in Auckland, or they were back then. We were thinking, my wife and I were thinking about returning to Australia, and when I met a guy called David Honan, he's a Western Australian winemaker, proprietor, who owned Cape Mentelle.
Yes.
In WA, Margaret River. He'd travelled to New Zealand He'd actually been given a bottle of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc by some visiting Kiwis, some Kiwi winemakers. David had won the Jimmy Watson Trophy 2 years in a row, and he was making these amazing Cabernets, and that attracted the attention of these New Zealand winemakers that happened to be there attending a wine conference in Perth. And they went down to Margaret River, and they called into Cape Mentelle to taste these wines that David had been making. And when they left, from the back of the renter car, they produced a bottle of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and said to David, here you go, mate, here's a bottle of wine from where we come from. And off they went into the dust. And well, that's the way I heard the story. And David was so amazed by the wine when he opened it that he travelled to New Zealand in 1984 and had a look around and decided to set up a second company in New Zealand.
Which would be the legendary Cloudy Bay.
Which became Cloudy Bay. So David offered me the role as winemaker and manager of the winery. So I helped build the winery, set up the winery, and then I ran the winemaking program there for 25 years. 25
years, goodness me. And what do you put the phenomenal success of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc on the international market down to?
I think it's just a magical combination of, it's a sort of serendipitous in a way, combination of grape variety and terroir, really. Principally the climate. Marlborough's got a unique, it's a highly maritime but very sunny environment. So the fruit ripens well, but with high UV, with very high intensity. I mean, our latitude is actually equivalent through the middle of Italy, if you look at the northern hemisphere. So our sun's very high in the sky, but because we're completely and utterly surrounded by water, we're a very maritime environment. So the temperature almost never gets above 30 degrees centigrade, even in the middle of a hot day in summer is 30 degrees. So we've got a high level of ripeness, but it never gets hot, so there's a very long, drawn-out growing season, and the fruit ripens. It ripens well, but it ripens very slowly in this long season. We get this incredible retention of fruit, concentration of fruit character, and beautiful natural acidity.
Now, looking at the Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, from Marlborough in particular, that's on the market today, what would you say the biggest difference is between a quality Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough and a commercial industrial product that one would find from Marlborough?
Well, Marlborough is a big region these days. It's when I started there was only 4 other companies, but now these days it's attracted a lot of the larger more corporate companies, and Marlborough produces all levels of Sauvignon Blanc quality, everything through from sort of sort of. I mean, Sauvignon Blanc grows very well in Marlborough, and it's relatively easy to crop. Crop quite hefty crops if you were to lay enough wood. So someone trying to hit a lower price point can achieve that fairly easily by cropping high, etc. But the thing, and in a really good year, you can. The great thing about Marlborough is that we do, and New Zealand in general, is that the average quality of our wine is very, very high. So we even our Vin Ordinaire wines are very high quality because we have this amazing climate. But the difference between the very best and the more commercial wines is generally sort of concentration, intensity, ripeness, those sorts of things. But now, as the region matures, you're seeing a development of other more sort of people are starting to investigate things like wild yeast, and people are starting to look into sort of sub-regional differences in microclimates and that sort of thing.
Which brings us rather nicely to the project you've been working on since 2009, or perhaps a little bit before, Greywacke. Now, Greywacke, I believe, is the name comes from the stone that runs throughout the vineyards.
It's actually the principal bedrock of the whole country.
I see.
New Zealand is essentially sitting on Greywacke. Greywacke is a sort of a sand mudstone combination, highly compressed. This is a piece of Greywacke. It's a really heavy. You can't scratch it. It's like it is a type of sedimentary rock, but it's very, very hard. It tends to have lines of course through it. It's not specific to New Zealand by any means. The Egyptians used to carve sculptures from this stuff.
Right. Okay.
You find it on the Scottish coast. I've seen Greywacke up in your part of the world.
I thought it looked a little bit familiar.
On the Sonoma coast, there's a vineyard called Greywacke Vineyard, a little vineyard. It's not specific to New Zealand, but as it says in one of the encyclopedias of New Zealand on the internet, if there was a national rock, this would be it.
I see. Now, when and how did this project come about?
2009 was the first vintage. After 25 years at Cloudy Bay, 25 years, 25 vintages, I turned 50 and I thought, well, it's now or never. I actually registered the name Greywacke in '93 with the idea that maybe one day I would use it on the label of my own. We owned, Kimberly and I, my wife and I, owned a vineyard which we called Greywacke because the soil was full of this rock. So then I had been contemplating it for a little while, and when I never owned a share of Cloudy Bay. So when I left, I didn't have a vineyard or a winery, but I had great friends, Ivan Sutherland and James Healy, who had left Cloudy Bay 5 years prior, had a wine company called Dog Point. And Ivan grows grapes for a number of other companies. And when he heard that I was thinking of doing my own thing, he invited me to buy his grapes, as you do when you're a grape grower. And they're very good grapes, and I'd worked with a lot of them before. Ivan had been the viticulturalist for Cloudy Bay for many, many years, so we worked together for a long time. And he had some spare room in the winery, so I started making a bit of wine in 2009, using primarily the Sutherland family's vineyards. So that's how we got off the ground.
And what size of production do you have today?
Well, in 5 years, or whatever it is, we've gone from standing start to around 30,000 cases, which we export roughly 93%, I think it is, to somewhere around 40 countries now. So it's certainly far exceeded any of my expectations.
Now, when the first consignment arrived on the shores of the UK, it's famously historied that a UK wine journalist called, I think it was a wine merchant, called your Sauvignon Blanc, the one that landed there, the most exciting Sauvignon Blanc of this generation. What do you feel about that?
I was chuffed. There was some very good media response to Greywacke when it arrived in the UK. I mean, the UK was always traditionally a very strong market for Cloudy Bay, and it was always going to be a very interesting market for Greywacke.
And what is it that you feel makes your Sauvignon Blancs from Greywacke so different from so many Sauvignon Blanc out there?
The style I try and make is a very ripe style. Maybe it's because I'm getting a bit older, but I'm not so tolerant of sort of high acid, aggressive Sauvignon Blancs anymore. I'm aiming for a more textural, sort of riper, more fuller, less acidic, less in your face. I absolutely want nice purity of fruit and intensity and sort of a mix of that sort of tropical fruit that you get in Sauvignon Blanc and a little bit of the herbaceousness, but I don't like too much herbaceousness. And I don't like the Sauvignon Blanc to be aggressive. So and that's all about nice vineyard size, keeping the crop levels down, getting good ripeness levels, making sure you get good ripeness levels by keeping your crop levels down. Nice open canopies. The fruit's ripening in a sort of a dappled sunlight rather than a shady canopy, and that way you get the fruit is sort of more golden when you pick it. It sort of tastes riper. It's more exotic, and the wine is just more textural, and that's my aim. But I make two Sauvignon Blancs. This is the Chardonnay and the Pinot. The two Sauvignon Blancs I make are Greywacke Sauvignon Blanc, which is the more classic of the two, and then I make another wine which I call Wild Sauvignon, which is something totally different really. It's 100% wild yeast. It's uncontrolled fermentation in old barrels, mainly old barrels. It's a partial malolactic style, so it's a more savoury, more textural. It's more sort of herbs and flowers. It's not so fruity. But it's very it has equal amount of concentration, but it's a much more subtle interpretation of Sauvignon Blanc. I use a lot of wild yeast. Wild yeast, when you use wild yeast, you're not using a specific type of wild yeast. You're allowing the juice to ferment with whatever the microflora of your vineyard is. So it's not as controllable, but what you tend to get more sort of individuality in your wine, more personality. The Chardonnay, these two wines are both 100% wild yeast. I don't add any yeast to these, so it's utilising the natural microflora, and you tend to get more savouriness. Two words that I use for the Chardonnay style that with wild yeast, in fact wild Sauvignon too, are sort of a lanolin linseed, sort of savoury note to the wine. And with the Chardonnay I ferment quite heavy solids as well, so the juice is quite cloudy before it ferments, and that gives the wine ultimately a very sort of smoky, almost peaty sort of a character.
Thank you so much for bringing your wines to Toronto. We're looking forward to, I think there's a March release of your Pinot Noir 2011.
That's right, yeah.
Very much looking forward to that because it was showing fantastically the other day. Thank you very much for spending some time with Good Food Revolution this afternoon.
My pleasure, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye for now.
Cheers.